Good morning and good evening, depending on which country and time zone you are dialing in from. My name is Darlene Chu Bryant. I'm the founder and executive director of GlobalSF. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for the New Economy Conference organized by GlobalSF and co-hosted by the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, GoBiz, and today in partnership with the California's Office of the Treasurer. Housekeeping. Today's program is simple. We have a keynote speaker and then a panel discussion in which the keynote will be joining us. Should you have a question for any of our speakers, please enter your questions into the Q&A section. Please do not enter it into the chat room. We will be addressing questions after the panel discussion today. And now to start our program. Investing in the New Economy and Keeping Businesses in California. That is the title of today's session and the third of 6 in our New Economy Conference. We hope you have been joining us the last 2 weeks. As everyone knows, California is the 5th largest economy in the world with the highest GDP in the nation. We are known for our innovation, and also we have actually a huge ag industry. We are also known for our high taxes, however, and over the last year, many have talked about the exodus from California. Is it really true? Today, we will be talking about the retention of companies and jobs. And from a venture capital perspective, actually, we received more than 50% of all the VC invested in the United States, more than double that of what Massachusetts, New York, and Texas combined received in 2020. And with that, I am going to thank you all for joining us today as we address this topic. To kick it off, I am delighted to invite our California State Treasurer, Fiona Ma. A fellow native San Franciscan, I have proudly watched her ascend from the time she was staffing Senator Burton to now be treasurer of the largest state in the union, of course, with a budget of 2.6 trillion. And I actually still remember running the halls at the California Democratic Convention, making sure that you got the votes to get the nomination to be our state assemblywoman. So with that, Treasurer Ma, Fiona, welcome.
Thank you, Darlene. Actually, I've been in San Francisco since 1988, but I feel like a native. Born and raised in New York, and then my parents came over with my grandfather, who was a minister in the Sunset District, and that's how we ended up out here in California. But it is my honor to be here today with my fabulous panel of women rock stars, and look forward to our dialogue coming up. But just to set the stage a little bit, California is still the 5th largest economy. I got elected 2 years ago, and our first year we were doing really great. We were still riding high and putting money into our rainy day funds and selling bonds, and everything was open and vibrant. But we all knew eventually that a downturn was coming. I don't think anyone expected a global pandemic that affected and shut down the entire world. So what happened in California? Many of you know there was a stay-at-home order, and we all had to pivot and adjust. But at the Treasurer's Office, I am the state's banker. So every tax, fine, fee, penalty, interest comes into my bank, and we are super sensitive to cyber concerns. And so 100 of my team members have consistently been in the office since last March. We balance every day to the penny, believe it or not, administering over $2.6 trillion every year is what we typically bring in through my office. Then I send money over to the controller's office to pay the bills, and whatever is left, I invest. We want to make sure we are earning money on our investments. And so every day, any idle funds I'm investing, as well as I invest for 22 local government units. Our portfolio hit an all-time high of $140 billion this week. And I think we're going to be increasing since the stimulus money will be coming also to the state of California very soon. And then I also issue all of the bonds for the state of California. All the general obligation, the revenue bonds, lease revenue bonds, and then also the bonds for the UC and the CSU systems. So that portfolio is about $95 billion. And even during the pandemic, we were the first state to go back out into the market in April of 2020. Kind of nervous, but We were well received, and investors were looking to place their money in safe investments that they trust, and that's the state of California. And I say that because we're going to talk a lot about what's happening lately and the rumors and whether it's real or not. But over the last year, we have consistently been out selling bonds, keeping people at work, saving taxpayers up to $4 billion now over the next 20 years by refunding older bonds. And our bonds are oversubscribed time and time again this spring. So people are watching. They understand and really appreciate what we're doing out here in California. Diversity matters, as we all know. We are a big state. One size does not fit all. And I think we will be talking about some of the industries that are economic drivers for us, those that we need to do a better job keeping here in the state of California. Some are leaving because they can, but also during this pandemic, I think a lot of people were working from home. But once we go back to a more normal situation and we're all going back to work, I think, would you prefer to work in Texas or would you prefer to live and work in sunny California, right? So we will be aggressively trying to woo some of these folks back to the state of California. So with that, I will open it up to our panel, and again, look forward to today's discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona. It's so good to have you with us today. And now I am pleased to invite Ms. Wenli Wang. She's the partner in charge at Moss Adams, the San Francisco office. In addition to being a board member of GlobalSF and SF Made in her spare time when she is not talking and working with her clients. Wenli, glad to have you with us today.
Thank you, Darlene, and thank you, Treasurer Ma, for the opening remarks. Before we start today's panel discussion, I want to let you know I have 4 amazing panelists, and all of them are accomplished and extremely talented. And most of all, we have an all-women panel today. How awesome is that? It cannot be a more appropriate today for today's topic with this all-women panel. We're going to discuss retention of business in California. When we think about how to retain businesses in California, it really comes down to a few key factors, such as ease of doing business from regulatory perspective, access to capital, cost of living, and most importantly, retention of talents. One of the main reasons California can be the leading force in the world in terms of technology, innovation, culture is how diverse we are. Having an all-women panel is a great proof of this. As Darlene and Treasurer Ma mentioned, that California is the 5th largest economic entity on the planet, but we're at an inflection point. We have a remarkable mix of innovation, productivity, high-profile companies, an educated workforce, and wide range of industries. We have Hollywood in SoCal, and we have Silicon Valley in NorCal. We also have Central Valley region, which provides more than half the fruits, vegetables, and nuts grown in the United States. However, the pandemic has exposed some major weaknesses in the state economy. Taxes are high, regulations are inflexible, housing is scarce, and economic inequality is on the rise. Many jobs have disappeared due to automation and offshoring, while a number of high-profile corporations have recently moved their headquarters out of the state. Our panelists today will discuss topics around economic, labor, and business environment of California in the post-COVID economy, focusing on how to make the state more friendly to investments and business retention, at the same time preserving and even enhancing the quality of life, resilience, and improved labor relations. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce my esteemed panelists. Fiona Ma, California State Treasurer. Katie Su, Senior Vice President, Head of Growth Marketing, HBO Max. Ashley Swearengin, President and CEO of Central Valley Community Foundation. Mary Washak, Associate Vice Chancellor for Public Programs and Dean of Extension at UC San Diego. So today, we're going to use the first round for some specific questions for each panelist, and then we're going to the general questions, including questions from the audience. So audience, please use the Q&A box to ask your questions. And my first question goes to Mary today. And Mary, it's so awesome to have someone like you to be on the panel. You bring academic authority and real life experience in job creation and how to take advantage of innovation technology to benefit the economic development. I did some homework on you, and I know you co-founded an organization like Connect, and also authored books like Invention and Reinvention. And you have been embedded for 40 years in the transformation of San Diego from primarily a military economy to one of the most dynamic innovation hubs in the country. And today, can you please share with us the key elements that made that possible? And what have you learned that businesses need to do to grow and innovate? And most importantly, looking out in the future, how can we apply the transformation in San Diego to the rest of the state? I know it's a loaded question, Mary, but I know you can do it.
So Fiona, I love your enthusiasm. It matches mine. And I've taken to quoting Patrick Soon-Shiong, who lives in Los Angeles, owns the LA Times, which I read, and the Lakers, who I follow, and is a life science entrepreneur, which is what I write about as a professor of sociology. And he made a wonderful remark when he acquired the LA Times. He said, California is where the world comes to see the future. And I think that is our challenge. How do we sustain California as the place where the world comes to create the future? And the San Diego story is a very interesting one because I think it's apocryphal in terms of what is feasible in Fresno, in Northern California, in LA, Santa Barbara, San Diego for sure, and the Bay Area, because in all those places, we have components that, if integrated into an ecosystem that is really full of talent and optimism, and thank you, Treasurer Ma, and self-confidence. A lot of it is our belief in our capacity to continue to grow the economy. And I did write a book for Stanford called Invention and Reinvention about the evolution of San Diego's economy. And I thought I'd take maybe 3 or 4 minutes to point out 4 or 5 of the critical elements of the ecosystem, and then a minute or 2 on what I feel the current administration needs to be paying attention to that is different today in a post-COVID and a much more globalized economy than 40 years ago when San Diego began its transformative journey. And I have to begin, and it's not just because I'm at UC San Diego. It has to begin with the powerful research community that is working across this state. You have Stanford and Caltech and Berkeley and UCLA and UC San Diego. But San Diego State University, which is a state university, is the highest ranked research university among state universities in the United States. So all of the institutions in California of higher education with research agendas, like San Jose State, Caltech, or UC San Diego, are punching way above their weight. And so that, what is it, something like 10% of NSF funding or more comes into the state. San Diego, LA, San Francisco in particular, but across the state, we're a magnet for external investment. You mentioned venture capital, but look at the amount of foundation and federal money that every year is invested in the talent that's based in our research universities. And we know the story of the Silicon Valley, and it's replicated in San Diego. It's being replicated in LA and other places. So we can't understate the value of continuing to support our universities, not just as teaching institutions, but as centers of invention. Because the second thing we have in this state is entrepreneurs galore. I've interviewed all over America for books that I've written in Missouri, in Illinois, and every young person who wants to be an entrepreneur says, I can't wait to graduate from the University of Illinois so I can move to California. I can't wait to graduate from Washington University in St. Louis so I can move to California. Because there is this entrepreneurial culture. And you know what I think is so interesting? It's not just the venture capital, but the data we have on who starts businesses and who leads businesses. 50% are immigrants. 50% are not people who grew up here, but we continue to be the place where the world comes to see the future. And how do we continue to retain and attract those sorts of people? So this entrepreneurial culture is more than just the young person who wants to start a business. It's our law firms. It's our banks. Look at Silicon Valley Bank, right? It's headhunters. It's management consulting firms. There is so much competence in this state around how to start and grow entrepreneurial companies, game-changing companies. And we need to respect all of that talent and how it works together. And part of the San Diego story is that a very small group of people 45 years ago who were in that space came together and said, damn it, we've got to become a more entrepreneurial, innovative ecosystem. The military is declining, the Berlin Wall is gone, defense contracting and military bases are not going to be the sole foundation of our economy. But out of all that R&D, all of that engineering know-how and business know-how that we had in our community, if we link it and collaborate, if we connect, we can support and build competitive companies. And I think what I would say in terms of this whole R&D entrepreneurial complex is, and I do say this to you, Treasurer Ma, it ain't bureaucratic and it's not managerial. In other words, it's an entrepreneurial economy is highly nimble. It can't be slowed down because you can't get a bank loan or you can't get access to capital. It can't be slowed down because you can't hire people you need to help you get your technology up and running and out into a global marketplace. It can't be slowed down because there's so many regulatory barriers, right? That you can't get access to water or you can't build a factory. And so it puts an enormous responsibility on local, regional, and state government to be mindful of what are the enablers and what are the barriers to an entrepreneurial as opposed to a managerial company. Big companies all started out as innovative small companies. And big companies, once they get big, maybe for them, taxes, cheap labor, other things become very important. But entrepreneurial companies just need to be nimble and need to be integrated with research institutions and wonderful talent pools. So the San Diego story was very much about linking the research economy with this small entrepreneurial, energetic community and the business service providers so that everybody was working in sync to move fast and to accelerate both failures and successes, right? And it's the whole idea. I'm very old. There was a wonderful book, In Search of Excellence, I read once, and they were talking about a petroleum company that did better than any other petroleum company. And it was, how could they? Because it's so uncertain. And the comment was, we drill more wells. So percentage-wise, we have a higher hit rate. California drills more wells. It builds more risky businesses. So it has lots that don't succeed, but guess what? When you do more, you have lots that do succeed. The two issues that I'd like to address that are also important that we undervalue, I think, is the importance of the talent pool that ends up working in these companies and growing in these companies. And again, I say this to a member of the governor's cabinet. What we've learned in San Diego, and we learned early, is that 36% of the people who work in high-tech companies are not college grads, right? They're people with very specific mid-level technical skills. So if we're serious about retaining companies, but also having an agenda that focuses on equity, diversity, inclusiveness, we've got to start focusing on strategies, not only to build our engineering and chemistry and physics workforce, but to build, retain, attract these mid-level skilled workers. And I worry that we don't pay enough attention. Community colleges are a piece of it, but they're not the only piece of it. There are fabulous programs across the state for veterans through our workforce partnership programs, through university extension programs in the CSU system, in the UC system, that can be a partner in assuring that the state has the talent pool it needs, both at the bachelor's, master's, and PhD level, but also in these mid-level technical skills, which can you can be qualified for through fast-track credential programs. And so the talent pool is a real issue. And in San Diego, part of our success was that the Economic Development Corporation, the San Diego Workforce Partnership, and the three leaders of the community college, state university, and University of California system actually sit down together and talk to one another about education and training. Now, typically in research universities, training is a dirty word, right? We don't educate, we train. But come on, our graduates have to be ready to work. So there are things we can do through curriculum innovations, but also certification programs that can accelerate the development of the talent pool that we need. The other issue, of course, is the attractiveness and livability of the environment. Entrepreneurs who like to ski are going to go to Colorado. Entrepreneurs who like to surf are going to come to San Diego. And I guess if you drink coffee and like to hike in rainy mountains, you'll go to Seattle. But amenities matter. And amenities are things like ease of transportation, access to housing, childcare, whether you're a middle skilled person or a high skilled person, everyone is dealing with the issue of how do I care for my children and also work. So in that ecosystem, there was a lot of attention paid to that in our region. And I think it bespeaks the need for the capacity for regions across the state to address it. Finally, I was in a long conversation with Wen Lee recently where we were talking taxes. And I said, my experience when I interview the small innovative companies, right? Okay, the big bureaucratic tech companies that are now more in a commodity space, right, than an innovation space, let them move to Texas. What we want is this continuous renewal, this continuous reinvention of the small, nimble entrepreneurial enterprises. San Diego has a dozen 12, $14 billion companies. It's not a Hewlett Packard, it's not a Microsoft, but they employ 10, 12,000 people. They contribute to the economy. And every job in a company like that has a spin-off effect for two other jobs in construction, food services, and other things. So keeping that churn in the innovation economy is really important. And bigger than taxes is regulations. And I'm a good Democrat, okay? I'll say that right here on the screen to everyone who's listening. But if we cannot find ways to fast track small companies, and if we create too many regulatory barriers to starting and growing a company, to making it possible for talent to live and work here, we're going to lose. And I would just conclude with all the components are here. They continue in San Diego. They're growing and expanding in LA. They're across San Francisco and the Bay Area and Northern California, and now the Central Valley. When you look at the innovation that's happening in agriculture and in related, environmental technologies. But we have to, as a state, recognize that nimbleness is the key, and communication and collaboration are key. And so we have to generate policies at the local, the regional, and the state level that enable that kind of nimbleness, that kind of flexibility. And that's the way we'll continue to keep California being the place where the rest of the world comes to see the future.
Thank you, Mary. Oh my goodness, there's so many great points I want to go back to. We're going to definitely touch on quite a few things a little bit later in the session. My next question is going to Ashley. Ashley, is a community leader, and you've been focusing on economic development in Fresno and Central Valley region for the last 20 plus years, and including mayor of Fresno for 7 years. And I know your focuses have been, improving like distressed neighborhoods and promoting businesses and job growth. And as a community leader, can you give us some perspective on the retention of business in California? And what do you hear most from the business in the region? And how do you think about, California of the future, particularly what Mary was talking about, connecting, NorCal and SoCal to the central region?
You bet. Well, I will certainly do my best. Good morning or good day to all of you. It is really exciting to be on this call, and just want to say a special thank you to GlobalSF for convening us, and to Moss Adams for putting their best foot forward and lending expertise and resource, not just today on this conference, but we see it certainly in our community, the way in which Moss Adams shows up and is a support to good community work. And hello to Treasurer Ma. It's so good to see you and love hearing your voice. And thank you for your sound, reasoned, methodical leadership in the Treasurer's office. Dr. Walshock, a longtime fan. I feel like I'm nerding out just a little bit here. And Katie Sue, it's a pleasure to meet you. All right, so I'm going to try to respond to the question you just put forward, Winley. And also, though, Dr. Walshock just dropped a whole bunch of great stuff. I want to introduce a little tension into the conversation, just because I think it's needed, and also we all can handle it. So I think the tension for me it's like a yes and, it's not an either or. And I would say I so appreciate the optimistic outlook that Treasurer Ma and that Dr. Walshock put forward. We have to hold that tight. That is DNA. That is an anchor point for California. It is not the whole story. We have to be able to acknowledge and honor and see and hear and understand that this whole Texas thing, I'm very curious and sort of fatigued by the debate being, is it real or is it not? Let me tell you, I don't actually know if it is or not, but let me tell you, it will be real if we don't treat it like it's real. The best way to ensure that Texas isn't a thing is to assume Texas is a thing, and to treat it as such. Where there's smoke, there is fire. I continue to be concerned about the time we're spending on debating, like, no, it's still great here. Look at all the assets, look at all the assets. Yes, and these are 50, 75, and 100-year-old assets that breathed their last breath like 20 years ago. So what is the California of the future? Is it just propping up and doing same old, same old? I don't think it is. So as much as I'm probably affirming a lot of business groups and business voices out there are like, yeah, that's right, assume it's real, let's go, do dramatic change. I also now want to confront that we cannot assume that a traditional approach to economic development is what the next 20, 40, 50 years will serve California the best way. Because we now see from, 100 years of investment and prosperity for some in California, it certainly has not lifted all boats. It certainly has not lifted inland California. Within inland California, within frankly, all of our states, it is so easy to see how, while these traditional mechanisms of economic development transform our economy that Dr. Walshock put forward, they are all, yes, we need these things, and there is more to it. I would suggest that going forward, California has to really rethink who is the customer. And in economic development, I'll tell you, after 20 plus years of doing this kind of work in my community in the Central Valley, we always start with, well, business is the customer, right? Like, yeah, you know, we just find out who are the businesses, you know, what's working for them, how do we make sure as government or civic actors, we support them having what they need so that they can expand? Because if in fact they do, gosh, everyone's going to benefit. And now we can see the wake of that kind of decision making, that kind of civic action, and we see, like, actually, in my community, that's not been the case. So if we can say, all right, business certainly key and important voice in this, but let's focus in on where are the communities that have not benefited from investments in traditional economic development. If we start with that, and Dr. Walshock was right on the money in saying, like, man, it is all about that entrepreneur. It's all about that small business. I would take it a step further and say it's all about that BIPOC entrepreneur. It's all about that woman-owned business. Because the very thing, and if we start as a community like that, really focus in on that Black-owned business, that woman-owned business, that African-American-owned business, that Asian-American-owned business, that Indigenous person-owned business, if that's our customer, and we backward map from there as society and we in community, we say, what's going to be most effective to help lift this person, this neighborhood, et cetera, all of the things we put in place end up benefiting other employers, other actors, et cetera. And so, I would just say, we've got, like, as a person who pretty much hangs out in the business community, like, we got to switch up who our customer is. The last point I'll make is this. The items that Dr. Walshock put on the table, that, you know, understand the power and the importance of the research agenda and the research capacity of California, entrepreneurial ecosystem, venture capital, having responsive local, regional, state government. You know, again, I would say that's all a yes and amen from my perspective, but who is the customer we're trying to serve? And then I would add, we have to be excessively aggressive in listening to voices that don't always come alongside with this agenda, right? So, you know, I find myself asking, like, well, gosh, this is really straightforward. Of course, we want common sense, rationalized government. Like, why is this so hard to make these things happen in California? In part, it's because our systems are so enormous, and we need really qualified, capable leaders like Treasurer Ma, like just handling business, taking care. We need competence in government for sure. There's a management challenge here, but you know, I really think there's more to it, and that is all of these actors that make up successful, thriving economies. We've all got to be challenging our biases. So, you know, again, I hang around mostly with business people, and they are just certain that they are victims. That the community groups and the social justice groups, the environmental justice groups, and the labor unions, they're all wrong. The business person knows best. And if their point of view can just be more powerful in Sacramento, everything's going to be fine. I could say the same exact thing about the social justice warrior or the EJ person or the labor union person or whatever. Everyone's so convinced their piece of the puzzle is the only one that matters. Now is the time to knock that stuff off and to challenge our biases and say, whoa, what is it about the community advocate that's in my own community arguing against my business expansion? What are they saying that I need to hear? We will never get to effective legislation, governance, regulation, et cetera, if society that surrounds those government institutions doesn't do the hard work of aggressively fighting for listening and relationships and finding a shared path. We cannot put that on the shoulders of a governor and a state legislature if, in fact, all the communities surrounding them refuse to take those steps. Our government is a mirror of what's going on in our community. So that has to happen. Those powerful, hard, challenging conversations have to happen. I'll close with this. So, and under the banner of challenging biases, like, I mean, gosh, if we, you know, we are living in such a wake-up call moment. Like, I don't think we would survive if we can't wake up in this moment. I shudder to think, well, then what would it take? Wildfires, pandemic, racial unrest. Like, I mean, what else is it going to take for us in California to say, whoa, time out? We're going to be humble for a minute. We're not going to just walk around acting like everything's great and look at all the assets we have and everyone's still jealous of us. That is old school thinking. That is old school leadership. The future of California is humility. The future of California is listening to people who don't always think like I do and of finding a shared path, okay? So that is the responsibility that we bear at the local, regional, the sort of the outside of government. If we're making those pieces work, it's going to surface much different and better options for our leaders in Sacramento. My last point, sorry, I keep saying that, this is my third time I said last point, this time I really mean it. Let me just take a moment to say, you know, all y'all that are in coastal California that are like, oh yeah, and the Valley, like we think they've got some stuff there too. Let me call you to challenge your regional bias. You likely do not know that every year, Fresno State and UC Merced are producing 5,600 STEM grads a year. They're not just farmers, but of course there is nothing but science involved in producing the world's food supply. And by the way, if you're eating something good today, a fruit or vegetable, it's come from the Valley. You know, I traveled to New York, you know, before the pandemic. I sat down to have a salad. I was like, oh, dear God, who eats this stuff? Like we have an abundance of this rich, quality, beautiful produce that comes from our own state. Of course, that's all science, technology based, but it is not exclusive to food production. Fresno State and UC Merced Fresno State is already the workhorse of the CSU, and UC Merced has some of the most recent and most contemporary research practices and equipment because of the newest campus. So anyway, this whole notion of how can the state actually work, it includes things like, well, maybe the Central Valley is a good location for a business expansion. If it means the Valley are moving out of state, everybody in California ought to be on board with that. Now, that doesn't mean that we're necessarily turnkey. We have been an underinvested region, and so that means some disproportionate levels of investment for our region in order to get to the point where we're turnkey. And it also means that business people, you know, maybe they can take a beat and be willing to work with a smaller community where their business and their employment opportunities are going to be cherished, they're going to be well supported, but it might take a little bit longer to get them to the point where they're able to open or expand. So I'll stop with that and really just arguing for, again, it's both and. It is both the things that have worked for us, but it is rethinking who these things serve. You know, who's going to benefit from the prosperity of the next 10, 20, 30, 40, hopefully 50 years? Let's change that now, and it requires having difficult conversations.
I love it. Love it. Thank you, Ashley. And I love the comments about challenging our biases and rethink who our customers are and think about from a regional perspective, what kind of things we can do there. So we're going to circle back on quite a few things a little bit later. I want to turn the question now to Katie. So Katie, you are the business executive here, and I understand that HBO Max is a relatively new business for Warner Media, and it was actually launched during the pandemic, I understand, and has since experienced very high growth. As the Senior VP of Growth Marketing of a prominent business in California, I'd love to hear, you know, your perspective, your experience in launching the business in the middle of pandemic, and your overall approach. You know, we talk about talents, you know, how to build a team that based in the capital entertainment tech.
Well, thank you so much, Wenli. And I just want to say how incredibly amazing it is to be on a panel of all women. I won't go through and thank all of you because I'm just amazed at all the accomplishments of the combined just group. I do want to start with a little bit of a personal story, which is I am actually one of the graduates coming out of the Cal State University system. I actually am very proud SFSU alumni. I also serve on their Entertainment Alliance board. And it is actually a lot of what Ashley was speaking about earlier, which is because I came out of that system, I very much wanted to dedicate so much of what I do today and give back to a lot of the students coming out of our systems in California, because there is potential and there is opportunity and there is progress for change. And I think that, you know, myself joining HBO Max was certainly a story like that. We did launch in the middle of a global pandemic. Building businesses are traditionally challenging, to say the least. Building one and launching one in the middle of a closed global world and economy was not something we anticipated. It posed really, truly unique challenges. And I think as a marketer, and many marketers and my colleagues were going through this as well, you had to just be super nimble and think and rethink all of the ways that you were taught and learned, I guess, approaches to how you would reach a customer. Because the reality is customers were, going through very difficult times. They were facing obstacles. They were enduring everything on a global level that nobody really had a solution to. And they were seeking comfort, they were seeking relief, and they were seeking entertainment as one of those options. And so, in a lot of ways, we were very fortunate because we were able to meet our customers' needs right at a moment in time where probably a lot of people were looking for it. And so when we launched in May of 2020, and as we actually look towards our upcoming 1-year anniversary, which is hard to believe, we've only been live for under a year. We've just experienced so much momentum because there was an intense appetite for content and storytelling with so many of people like isolated at home, and they wanted the shared experience. And you could have a shared experience at home through content, through storytelling, through shows and films. And for myself, when I was building up the growth practice, I wanted to build a team that reflected the world around us. And I wanted them to be from the communities themselves so that we could market authentically to the communities. Growing up in California, I was very fortunate. I grew up in the Bay Area. I was exposed to a lot of different cultures. And because of that, I brought that to the marketing discipline itself. And so by and large, my team is mostly based in Los Angeles, and I could find that talent here in California. And that's not to say that I don't have team members in other cities. I think one of the greatest things coming out of the pandemic is you realize that, a business could not only survive, but actually thrive while working remotely. And I think that changes the way, business leaders like myself hire, cultivate, and invest in talent. And we talked a lot about just how we retain them. The amenities mattered. I mean, Dr. Walsh, I loved what you said on that because I think about that a lot. What can I do to help my team feel more connected to their families, their loved ones, the work, and be able to have the freedom of being remote? When you spoke about childcare, it's so important. Like, these are all the things that we have to think about because the world around us has changed. And so being nimble and being able to operate in that way, not just to the pace of the market to drive revenue, but to the needs of the people, it matters so much to the success of any business. And, that said, being based in Los Angeles, it does afford a robust community of talent, especially given our city's position at the center of entertainment and technology. It's truly been pretty interesting. And when we eventually return to the office, we're going to be based in Culver City, which is really at the epicenter of where entertainment and tech are meeting. And so from a California perspective, I think, there's just this massive transformation on tech hubs, entertainment. What is that cross intersection becoming? And to be able to be a part of that and build that is actually really exciting. And I think, one of the things that I will say to sort of wrap this all up is, as we look to the future of entertainment and the tech industry at large, I truly believe that California remains at the forefront of creating culture that extends beyond our borders to impact the world around us. And the ability of me to build this team reflecting the various communities and actually driving towards the success that we have is a validation point that it's possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. And that is a great success story, and we love hearing that. So the last question, first round, goes back to Treasurer Fiona Ma. And you have heard different perspectives, but I think there are some common themes here. And as a Treasurer of California, you mentioned manage almost $3 trillion of GDP. And many other states or nations, look up to the state of California and emulate what we do. In many cases where I do share the optimistic view, we are in an enviable position, but we definitely have the unique set of challenges facing our states, such as the continued loss of, businesses. Whether the California exodus is true or a myth, we have to think about it. And it is, to a certain degree, it is happening and happening in a continuous way. And from your perspective, we'd love to hear, your thoughts. And also the pandemic seems, finally going to be behind us. And how can you share with us, how we can reshape and rebuild our state so we can recover quickly and also encourage, what kind of things we can do to encourage the business to stay or even expand in our state rather than, moving out of the state.
Okay, so thank you. I got a chance to hear all the amazing comments. I agree with everything everyone said. And I'm going to maybe come at it through the government angle. And Ashley knows, as the former mayor of Fresno, what happens in government matters to whether we could be nimble and whether we are communicating and to understand who our customers are. And so I come from a tax perspective. I started in the real estate group at one of the big 8 accounting firms, and then left and started my own practice because nobody looked like me at one of the big firms back then. And so having that private sector experience with that tax understanding, that taxes do matter. And my years in government, and I think Ashley can agree, that's the last thing we want to do, right? If we encourage or create incentives for businesses and individuals to do better, well, tax revenues come in, right? Sales tax, income tax, corporate taxes. And so my focus has always been on trying to improve and create and contain or retain or attract businesses to stay here in California. And then we all, right? The tide lifts all boats instead of just certain boats. I also got into public service as the president of the Asian Business Association. That's where I met Darlene and others a long time ago. And my job was to go and lobby local, state, and the feds for more contracting opportunities for women and minority small businesses. So I also understand how difficult it is to break through some of these bureaucracies if there are not people on the other side that are going to be welcoming, that want to work with you, that understand some of the barriers and tries to break them down. So I'll give you an example. Because of the pandemic and we're all in our office or in our homes, I was in Sacramento all last year pretty much. And because of these Zoom calls, I think that has really helped to open up government, where more people can listen to our meetings, participate versus having to come up on a certain day and take off time from work, which doesn't work for many of us. So I'll just give an example on housing. I chair the 2 housing financing committees that issues the tax credits. So we have 9% and 4% tax credits, as well as the private activity tax exempt bonds. So housing policy, there's 2 agencies under the governor's office, Housing and Community Development, as well as the California Housing Financing Agency. And then the 2 financing agencies are under the treasurer's office. And people say, well, why is that? Like, why don't we just combine it all in like one umbrella? Well, there is a bill right now that is seeking to do that, and I am opposing that because of, number 1, the separation of duties, but number 2, understanding that me as a former entrepreneur, as the treasurer and focused on bringing in and retaining our jobs and our revenues, I've kind of changed the way our housing agencies have been operating these last 2 years. I created a a stakeholder active working group, because these are the people that are on the ground, that know what their pipeline is, know what the barriers are, and we turned it over to them, 30-person, diverse from all over the state, big, small, central, coastal, rural, urban. And we said, you tell us how you would like to change our regulations. You tell us what criteria you would like to compete against. You tell us what your tiebreaker should be. And whenever the group could not come out with a consensus, then the board would weigh in on policy, right? We would say, well, we want more here, or we want this type of housing. And I think it was very, very effective. Granted, I chaired 18 committee meetings, personally, 18. There were sometimes more than 100 people on these Zoom calls that they could not get in, and they were very, very upset that they couldn't get in. But the fact that everybody had skin in the game, They knew that we were listening, and we were trying to do, like Dr. Walchuk said, is to capture that entrepreneurial spirit. Because the way we do housing in California is a private-public partnership. We issue the bonds and the credits, but we work with the private developers who are out there actually creating the housing. So I think that was a successful model. If you ask any of your housing developers whether they like that model, I think you will find that it worked, because we've issued more housing units, or creating more housing units than ever before in a more orderly and transparent manner. Also in my office, because I've always been about leveling the playing field, we actually are very deliberate on who underwrites our bonds. So we have two ways to sell bonds: either competitive, kind of like, you know, when you're going to go to a foreclosure and you stand out in front of the courthouse and lowest bid wins. We have that model. And then the other model is we place people in certain positions because the bonds are very, very, high, like $2 billion or more. But I always make sure, and my team now makes sure, that we have a diverse group of underwriters in each of those spots. To the extent we can move up more Latino, African-American, women, veteran-owned, disabled-owned companies into those slots, the more successful we are. And we don't pick and choose, our favorites every time, because that doesn't create competition. If people know that they have a chance at, being in one of these spots, well, they stay competitive, and they start hiring more people in California, because they also want to increase their chances. So keeping everyone competitive in an open, environment, I think, is very important. And then also in government, we have a couple of incentive programs, and I'm happy that Governor Gavin Newsom has actually increased these programs. One is the sales tax exemption program. So for companies who are cleaning and greening the environment, buying expensive equipment like the Teslas of the world, they can apply to waive their sales taxes. And this could be 10%, of millions of dollars, which helps them reinvest their money back into their businesses instead of having to, pay this extra tax. And I understand some people don't like, tax incentives or tax credits, because they always go, oh, we're giving something away. And I always say, you can't give away something when nothing is here producing anything. I would say 0% of zero is zero. So why don't we give a little incentive, create some interest, like our film tax credits, which we know is working. I have a bill to expand the film tax credits to more diverse communities. Why don't we do that and get them back from Georgia? Why aren't we incentivizing agriculture, right? With our, I forgot the sales tax exemption. The property tax exemption for agriculture. That is a big game changer, whether families are to continue to stay in the agriculture industry or sell it to the highest and highest bidder. And then we also have a Cal Competes program. So for companies who are interested in coming to California, expanding in California, if they meet certain criteria and create a certain number of full-time employees, we actually give them an income tax deferral for 3 to 5 years to allow them to grow and expand. And the governor expanded both those programs by giving us each $100 million each. So I think it's important, like everybody says, we have to encourage the entrepreneurial spirits. And if we keep layering on more regulations and more taxes, that's when people get upset and they go, we're going to leave. High net worth individuals, they can leave. They don't need to stay here in California once their kids are grown, right? Certain companies like technology, where they don't have to be here with physical facilities like banks or agriculture, they are also thinking about moving out. But if we create a culture that is welcoming, that incentivizes, that helps them grow, like everybody else said here on the call, they will want to come back and they will want to stay and invest in California. So we have a full-time legislature with 120 members. Right now, we are Democrat, 2/3 in both houses. All of our constitutional offices are all Democrat. We get that, but we need to also educate, lobby, and invite members to come out and see what is happening. I've done about 150 agriculture tours. So I understand what impact agriculture, and they call me whenever there are bills or taxes that are going to negatively impact them or create negative competition with other states or other countries. And so I step up and speak up, but that's what we all need to do. Invite members of the legislature, your local elected officials, your county board of supervisors, your water district boards, right? Invite them out to see what you're doing so that they can see for themselves how certain policies may impact the industries and the economies that we want to have here and grow here in California.
Thank you, Treasurer. This is such a candid conversation, and I'm just every time I speak, I hear you speak, and always inspire me by your authentic leadership style. And I love hearing the philosophy behind the tax incentives. And as a tax professional myself, and that's definitely something that been working really, really well. And you also talked about the regulations. Shared your thoughts on that. Actually, that remind me, policies and regulation can definitely be enablers and can be huge barriers at the same time. A story I remind me of, I just heard in the session 2 of the New Economy Conference. We discussed logistics and supply chain. And one of the panelists, Hans Galland, actually is also a GlobalSF board member, and he's the founder, CEO of Holistics. He mentioned that his company has about 20 people, and 4 of them are in California, and half a dozen is in Columbus, Ohio, and the rest is in China. And the only reason they have people in Columbus, Ohio is because the regulatory issues in California, they can't really do what they do effectively in the state. And their vision is to provide better logistical efficiency and higher economic benefit to independent truckers. But they have this beautiful idea, have to turn to a different state to implement it. This is just one of the many examples in this area I can think of. And I want to continue the regulation conversation. I would love to hear from 1 or 2 of the other panelists about your thoughts on the regulation piece and how we can reach a balance of necessary regulations for the greater good of our community and also future generations, but still maintain a relatively friendly doing business environment.
Yeah. Wen-Ling, can I just ask?
Yeah, please.
Talk about regulations negatively impacting communities or businesses. There are also regulations and mandates for BHAGs, which I think this governor is really good at, Governor Gavin Newsom, on those big, hairy, audacious goals of setting the stage, right? 0 emission vehicles by 2035. And now that is creating a tremendous amount of interest in EVs, storage technology. But once they come here, I get nervous because then we start trying to overregulate. And then by, opening it up, and that's who we are, right, Dr. Walsack? We're entrepreneurs. People will come, and you have all these companies now popping up and wanting to do everything. And then all of a sudden, government sees it, says, "Ooh, it's kind of a money maker. So maybe we should regulate them. Maybe we should charge them fees and fines and penalties if they don't." And then what happens is you stifle that entrepreneurship. So I just want to add that there's policies that can create entrepreneurs and more jobs, but then we have to just be careful on the government regulation side that we don't actually start smothering them so that they cannot survive.
Absolutely.
Lee,
That's been a huge
I-
conversation. Mary, go ahead.
I would like to defer
of you
to
want to-
Ashley, but I want to share with Ashley because we're starting a major UCSD center downtown, working with the Black Chamber and working with some entrepreneurial organizations that face barriers I never understood. Okay. And so I just like to share with the secretary and everybody else on the screen. You can build entrepreneurship programs, right? You can train, develop people, give them skills, even give them access to mentors. But if they don't have sufficient cash flow to be a supplier to a larger company, they cannot competitively bid as a supplier. It may be a supplier of food services, or it may be a supplier of web services. And so in San Diego, Ashley, there's a not-for-profit mission-driven finance that is raising a fund to make loans to minority-owned businesses to help them in that 4 to 6 month, billing cycle, supply cycle. It's that particular. If you want to open a restaurant or a bar, right? And you have to get a license and you have to go through all of these barriers. Sometimes you're going to need $50,000 and you're going to need somebody advising you just how to open a neighborhood restaurant. And we need to ask ourselves, are we creating barriers? Do you see what I mean? For entrepreneurs, because they are entrepreneurs, and childcare, the need for neighborhood childcare, particularly in underserved neighborhoods. And the regulatory guidelines, the education and training guidelines are costly and time consuming. Is there a way to change that? Is there a way to fast track that? It's not to eliminate, but it's to, in a sense, speed up the process. And Ashley, I was so touched by your remarks because I'm hearing so much of this, what you said, which is, well, that business model works when you have a lot of social capital, you got parents who can open doors, your uncle works at the bank, right? You got another uncle who's an attorney. But what if you're a first generation person just trying to open a business in your neighborhood? And none of that is there. So how do we build social capital for people previously excluded from these early tools and benefits that allow them to create and grow businesses? And we're not addressing that.
Well, yeah, thank you, Dr. Walshock. And I also, Treasurer Ma, I think you positioned it just right. So a quick answer to your question just now, Dr. Walshock, at the, that local regional sort of economic development space, as I said earlier, I think, how do we do that? How do we build those things? We include and center the work around the people who represent the communities we're trying to lift up. And so in Fresno, for example, that looks like getting all the community and economic development partners around the table and then saying, okay, what you normally do needs to be like, we actually need to shift and pivot and include members of the community who have never had access to a discussion on what kind of future economy do we want, or how do we best support small businesses. Let's stop just thinking that if we stay in our bubbles, talking the way we always do, we're going to get different outcomes. So it's really simple. It's like include in the conversation. Like that actually does lead to different policies and different programs and interventions. And we'll see, we believe different outcomes, but we know the way we've done it in the past hasn't worked. I think to go back to this bigger question of what is going on with the state regulatory environment. And I appreciate the point about hey, not all regulations are bad. That's 100%. We have those of us maybe who come from that business-minded, bias against regulations, we have to stop for a second and own that and receive that and absorb it in order to have a productive discussion. Let me say though, and Jennifer Hernandez, I appreciated her comment in the Q&A, there are, it seems to me from the outside looking in, and certainly others could challenge this point of view, but it seems to me like there are some untouchables in the current California governing climate, that we cannot speak of CARB. We cannot speak of things that might need to be reconsidered or updated, or can we not just have a little bit of a refresh and a reset after decades of, really historic policy making and regulatory wins and positive outcomes can we evaluate? Can we stop and think? Can we ask those questions? I know that politically there are folks that are center left. They're like, you know, I'm gonna presume to speak for you for a minute, and you could tell me after, like, shut up, you don't speak for us. That's fair. But what I hear offline when the microphones aren't on is I hear we can't say that. Our base won't let us talk about that. And if that's true, I respect that. But somebody has to step into this space and be like, yeah, look, it doesn't mean throw the baby out, but can we stop and think for a second? So just as I would suggest at the local level and the regional level, we need different folks showing up, BIPOC communities being the center and the customer of economic development infrastructure. In Sacramento, we need the small business to be at the center of the regulatory regime. And I'll just take a second to give a shout out to Tara Lynn Gray, who's the new Office of the Small Business Advocate that Governor Newsom just appointed, hailing from Fresno, also the Bay Area. So we have joint ownership of Tara Lynn Gray. She's a perfect example of the person you want in the room with CARB actors. You want her in the room with transportation, education, like anybody who has an aspect that's going to touch a small business. You want Tara in the room. You want to be able to say, now, Tara, this is the environmental outcome we're going for. This is the way we think this operationalizes. Give us your perspective and let that come in. Like right now, a small business is impacted by every single state department, just, you know, the hundreds of them. And there are these big chunks of mega regulators. The small business feels and is touched by all of them, but that regulator only knows the one touch they have on that business. There's no perspective in Sacramento that's like, okay, here's the 360 on how all y'all come together to impact this person or this business that's trying to grow and prosper in their local community. There is today, there's honestly in my 20 years of community economic development, there, you know, we've had different iterations of business, transportation, housing, you know, there's GoBiz, et cetera. The reality is this, whatever that mechanism has always been, it's been like the pinky finger of the, you know, the big hand of state government. It does not work in concert, and it does not on its own have the strength to influence different outcomes and different conversations. That can only come from the governor, his cabinet, legislative leadership saying it's not going to happen on its own. So we will force a focus on the impact of small business as we are considering all of the business that comes across our desk. Until and unless somebody thinks of a way to better embed that perspective, it's got to come from our leaders. And I will go back to my earlier comment. Why would they do anything if we at the local level, if we in the, you know, out in the wild, in the community, if we are not organizing ourselves and modeling how we can come into agreement with one another and we can project a different future at the local regional level? Why would we expect, you know, a relatively small handful of people in Sacramento to be able to pull that off, or 40 million people? If we 40 million, we're not in agreement. So why do we expect our leaders to be? So it's this whole both and, you know, and I just don't want to be casting stones that like it's all Sacramento's fault, but also you're our leaders and you have power and you can instantly infuse this perspective while others of us at the local regional level are trying to move in the same direction.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Ashley. So we have touched on, you know, regulations, and Katie shared her success story on talent retention, and everybody kind of addressed that as well. We have 3 questions from the audience. I think the first 2, we kind of touched on it. So I'm going to move on to the, from anonymous attendee talking about tax rates. This is something that, you know, that an alternative way asking this question, actually, I had a similar thought is, I've been, you know, working for the past 20 plus years, working primarily with business owners and private client, you know, private businesses. And a lot of them, you know, the fortunate group was able to create the wealth through their hard work, through, you know, seizing the opportunity and willing to take risks. But then once they create this wealth, I know most of them from my working experiences, they want to give back to the community, and they don't mind paying the taxes if they feel the wealth is reallocated, redistributed effectively or efficiently. And the general sense is there's some, you know, concerns about whether the state is, the way how we are reallocating wealth is going to the right direction, or the direction most people like to see. And this is something I would like to, it is addressed to Treasurer Ma, but I'd love to hear, other panelists' comments, is how we can, redeploy the wealth more efficiently and effectively, and how we can be more building a stronger connection between the business community and the local community organizations, and also the state policymakers.
Yeah, so I would agree with Ashley. Small business is the backbone of our economy, yet to be a small business owner, it is so difficult, right? You're worried about, just keeping your doors open, your lights open, your employees happy. And then you have the health inspector, and you have, the Department of Public Works, because your tree in front is whatever. I mean, it just keeps going on and on. So, unfortunately, small businesses don't have the luxury of hiring lobbyists to be up in Sacramento, 9 months out of the year, and building those relationships and showing up at committees and testifying and all that. And so we do depend on people like Tara at the small business, our small business advocate, but she also has to be at the table. If she is not welcome at the table, then she is not going to be able to advocate on behalf of small businesses. So I always believe when we do any sort of stakeholder engagement, we're thinking about changing policies, we're thinking about a new policy or how to do something different, to have more people at the table versus less. And I know people don't like that. They're always like, oh, it's too wild, it's crazy, it's too much trouble, it's hard to get anything done. But the wider you make the table, the better the policies come out, because now you're going to get a true sense of what's really happening versus just a small sliver. But I know it's a lot of work. When it comes to taxes, like I said, my dad used to complain about paying his taxes. And I go, Dad, why are you complaining? You're making money. And he's like, oh, okay, that's a good point, right? So when people are making money, I don't think they mind paying their fair share of taxes. But like you said, where are the resources going, right? Are they going to tackle the problems that we all see, that we all want to tackle, right? Or is it going to other things that people are not prioritizing? And so that's what I think leaders in government need to focus on, is what are the priorities for the people? And that means you have to get out of your office. You cannot sit in your office. You need to go and visit and see, drive around California. I spent spring break driving in a bus all over California, just seeing all these different type of businesses, mostly through the Central Valley, Yosemite, Central Valley, the Tehachapis, and then all the way through Ventura. But that's what we need to do. And then as communities of interest, you all need to get together as well. And I'm very impressed with the Coachella Valley. I've been working with the Lift to Rise Coalition. They have 9 cities, maybe more, Heather will probably correct me, that have gotten together to come up with a capital stack so that they could build 10,000 units over the next 10 years. And they just want government's help, just a little bit of help, for us to create that loan loss guarantee, that initial seed capital of $50 million. And they are having a difficult time, even though their communities have come together. But they're persistent, they're strong, they stick together and they lobby together. And that's the way you can get things done in government. The squeaky wheel really does get the grease. So I keep encouraging them and telling them how they should do it, who they should talk to. And so hopefully in this budget, they will get their $50 million.
I just want to reinforce Ashley's comment about the diversity of voices, because I think, and you're getting at it, Fiona, there are unintended consequences for lots of policy initiatives. In music and athletics, right? The assembly bill to essentially disallow contract workers had unintended consequences on musicians and athletes who were earning good livings by having 4 and 5 contracts. I work with the symphony. I teach by contract for UC San Diego. I also play in this jazz band, and they were treated like exploited workers. And that was partly because we have legislators who are not listening to a wide enough circle of stakeholders. And so I believe at the state level, there is a leadership opportunity to get more voices into these early conversations about policy so we don't suffer these unintended consequences. I think it's a powerful message from this conversation, at least for me.
Awesome. And with less than 15 minutes to go, I'm going to ask the final round of questions that we're going to ask each one of you share some closing remarks, and then we'll close after that. So the last question came from Wayne Lee, and this is a question that actually, it's under the talent retention category. And my understanding is the statistics says that, over 27% of us in California are foreign born, including me, myself. And the question is, how does immigration affect California's business? The growth of business here in California business grew their bottom line internationally. And anyone can answer the question, please. Go ahead.
You know what?
Go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead.
I came off mute, but then I realized, Dr. Walstock is actually really the voice on this, seeing the impact in San Diego. But I think the only thing I would say is that we have to anchor in this truth that it is in fact how and why California has evolved as it has. And so to depart from the embrace of the immigrant in this state would be a departure from what has actually gotten us to this place. So I think it would just be a huge betrayal of who we are as a place. So, beyond that sort of, I don't know, just framing comment, Dr. Walstock, you see it, you wouldn't have the success you have in San Diego, but for the embrace.
So I'm going to be a sociologist for a moment. My parents were Swedish immigrants. My mother couldn't speak a word of English. She got on a boat when she was 19. She came to a country where she didn't even speak the language. You talk about grit and courage and risk taking, which is how we think about entrepreneurs. Wenley, it's got to be true for you and your family. And Ashley, you're absolutely right. In California, we understand that when you say immigrant, you say risk taker, ambitious, hardworking, willing to learn, willing to sacrifice. That's what an immigrant means in California. And the national discourse in recent years has been distorted. Oh, it's low wage labor that's stealing our jobs. And so I think the conversation about immigration really has to be shifted in terms of the assets. And I agree, Ashley, it's not just our history, but in fact, we have been the beneficiaries as a state, our openness to people. The editor of the Union Tribune many years ago, a man with the name of Neil Morgan, a lifelong Republican, by the way, very close to Herb Klein and the Nixon administration, once said to me, anybody who's willing to walk 1,000 miles to get a job in California is someone I want working for me. And the notion that the man or the woman who walks 1,000 miles is a loser rather than a winner, I think is one of our big problems. Sorry, enough on that.
No,
Yeah,
well said.
And I would like to add that there is more focus these days on ESG, since that's kind of the space I'm in with CalSTRS and CalSTRS and investing in different companies. But ESG, the environment, the social, and the governance. And it goes back to what everyone's saying, is that you need to value your employees. These days, especially young people, right, Katie? They're a little bit entitled. They want to get a raise. They want to, they think they can be president of the company like right away. You need to figure out how to keep them, right, with your company, right? You need to treat them well because they have lots of options these days. And I always say in government, your employees have always been closer to me than my own family because I can always be in a bad mood. I can get into a fight with my family. They're always going to still be there. Well, not necessarily with your
Right.
And if you want to be successful in whatever you're doing, you need to treat your talent, your employees as good as you can and make sure that they're heard, make sure that they feel valued every day, do whatever you can to make their life a little bit easier. And so, in government, it's not that easy because we can't give bonuses to people if they show up more or have been in the office every day, but I do provide lunches, bag lunches once a week. I try to, make sure I go and visit them and thank them for being in the office, right? We try to do the little things that we can just to value our employees. And I think that is so, so important to making sure our economy grows. If they're happy here and they like their jobs, they're not going to want to leave.
It definitely resonates with me quite a bit. Katie, I know you were nodding and smiling. I'm sure resonate with you as well. Do you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that was said because retaining talent is not just the fabric of helping California in general. It's actually the backbone of many companies and businesses. And even speaking for myself and my own personal experiences, I grew up in California from a family of immigrants in San Francisco. I went through the state school system, incredibly proud of the world that I grew up in and continue to see. And I feel a great sense of responsibility of continuing that legacy and that mission of hiring people who believe in the same mission. And a lot of that also leans into leadership traits and leadership skills that, frankly, only people who have that lived in experience can, a lot of times model. And I believe so much in giving back. And that's why this conversation has been so personally fulfilling for me. It just validates a lot of what I try to do in my day-to-day, because if we as business leaders are not the ones investing in diverse talent, in young talent, who will? And then that actually breaks the infrastructure of what we're trying to build that has a long sustaining impact in our global economy. And so I think it's so much more than just, hiring great talent, the retaining of them. That is the sweet spot that leaders have to grapple with today because there are so many options. And so I think if we do a really good job of showing up, representing the values that we believe are important, we bring that to the businesses that we own, operate, and run. I do think over time, and not overnight, it will make a material difference in retaining some of the best talent we have in California.
Awesome. Love hearing that. And we have 6 minutes to go. So I'm going to go around with a fire round of closing remarks. We'll go to the same order as the opening. Mary, you want to go first?
It's the challenge, and I think we've gotten some great ideas in this conversation, is the issue in California. We've always managed until very recently to balance equity and access with excellence and exceptionality. And I think we can still do it, but I absolutely agree with Ashley. What I would say, Ashley, is the principles of collaboration and building ecosystems are still solid principles. But if you don't have the diverse array of voices and talent and human needs in those early conversations, we're going to create collaborative mechanisms and ecosystems that are going to fail us. And I feel that's been a very, very important message from this conversation. And I'm grateful to have been a part of it.
Thank you, Mary. Ashley.
Well, gosh, same. I've been, it's just been a pleasure to just sit and talk with all of you. I think I'll just kind of touch on my opening comments and maybe just land with this. I know that they're like, for all the reasons I understand, it's very difficult for public leaders to be honest and humble about the challenges that our state faces with our current, with our status quo. And yet that's the pivot we need to take. We need to take it at the local and regional level. We need our state leaders too as well. You know, having worked in a city that has certainly had more than its fair share of setbacks and is a little bit of a come from behind type of environment and city, what I learned as mayor is that if you can't be really honest and transparent about your, like just acknowledging what's not working, people are not going to be with you. They're not going to believe in you when you're trying to address those things. So it's really important that in this moment, every economic development, business leader, community leader, state legislature, constitutional officers, et cetera, let's be okay with saying, like, you know what? We don't know about Texas if it's real or not, but not on our watch. It will not happen. So we, you know, there's enough smoke here. We need to be thinking differently. And then, you know, and then just really rethinking for each sort of stakeholder group that is most present and attempts to be influential on every day of the year in Sacramento. My challenge to all of us is, who are you not listening to that you need to listen to? And if each stakeholder is willing to say, okay, I'm not comfortable listening to a labor voice, then that's who you need to go sit and listen to. And if the labor leader is not comfortable sitting and listening to the environmental advocate, then that's who you need to go sit and talk to, et cetera. Like this, like honestly, this is the only way forward. And really, Dr. Walshock, this, what you just said to me makes a lot of sense. It's not that we need a whole new formula of what does it take to make a thriving, successful economy. We know it's education, it's infrastructure, it's, you know, it's all these kinds of things that have gotten us to this point, but we can't refresh on the California dream. We can't replenish and plan for and put in place another 100 years of infrastructure that supports 40 plus million people if we don't do it differently right now. It has not been modeled for us really at scale in the last 50 years. So we are kind of just trying to figure this out. But that's the call for our leaders right now. Listen to who you wouldn't normally listen to and take some risks on new partnerships and collaboration.
Thank you, Ashley. Katie, how about you?
My point of view is simply from a place of just being very inspired. And I just want to say thank you. As a business leader, all the things that we've touched on before help make what I do possible. And so really all of what each of you are pushing for and trying to strive for allows me to actually retain some of the best talent. So truly, I just wanted to say thank you, and that, you know, my commitment is to continue on the mission, despite the fact that it's not necessarily going to be an overnight thing. And that, you know, it keeps the dream alive that maybe one day I could potentially become an entrepreneur and a founder. And I think that that's actually the California dream.
We'll be watching you and hope to see more success stories, Katie. And Treasurer Fiona Ma, please.
Yeah, I think all of us are super competitive on this panel, and that's what makes California the 5th largest economy. We have been dying to open up and get back to business. So I think we need to be intentional. We need to make sure that when we are creating boards, that they are diverse. When we are supporting people, when we are endorsing people, when we are hiring people. And that comes with leadership. Leadership starts at the top. And if leaders aren't willing to look at what is really happening on our corporate boards, in our government sectors, we are not going to continue to be the 5th largest economy. And so thank you, ladies, for all being here. And I'm inspired as well on being a panel. And someone said in the chat, you guys are fired up. Yeah, we are fired up and ready to go. Let's open up and get back to business. Thank you, Darlene.
Absolutely.
Love you.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for all the panelists for the robust and candid conversation. And thank you, Mary, for the subject matter specialist, and Ashley, community leader and business leader, Katie, and particularly Treasurer Fiona Ma for taking time out of your busy day with us to be with us today. And thanks for the audience for attending the session. We hope it was a productive conversation for you. And I want to thank Bruce Pickering he's the architect behind this session, and Darlene Chu Bryant for her amazing leadership. And last but not least, I want to thank awesome team GlobalSF, Anthony, Cooks, and Xue. Without you, the session would not have been possible. So I'm going to turn it to Darlene to close.
Great. Thank you so much, Wenli. You took the words right out of my mouth, but I want to thank you for leading such an amazing conversation. It's very pertinent, and we had an amazing, female panel, all rock stars. I am just so excited today with the discussion and all the content that we had. And again, I want to reiterate, I want to thank Bruce Pickering. He has been the chief architect of this whole conference, and he's also the senior advisor on policy for GlobalSF. So thank you, Bruce, for working with us and putting this all together. And again, thank you, Fiona, for being a partner and for being our California State Treasurer. I'm waiting, and I'm going to be here supporting you, moving up to the next level. I am going to be behind you all the way. And of course, to our speakers here, Dr. Mary Walshaw, it was lovely having you today. Ashley Swearingen, as mayor of Fresno. I'm going to come down to Fresno one day again soon. I miss the road, the drive down there. And to Katie, so glad to have you here today and to learn more about your experience and how we can really, continue to hire. The diversity is really important. And I want to remind our participants that today's conversation is the seed for a working group tomorrow that will be addressing all the topics that were raised today. The group is actually by invitation only and is charged with coming up with recommendations to our state, federal, and even local legislators. And so join us again for our next conversation on sustainability and urbanism, tongue-tied, with Kate Gordon, Director of the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. Same time next Wednesday, May 12th, 10 a.m. Pacific time. In the meantime, please check out our podcast, www.globalsf.biz, and stay in touch. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and for joining us today. Thank you all, and have a good day.